Well, I think we're going live right now, Dan. So we can get going. Thank you. Welcome everyone to day 3 of COP28. And this is the COP Drop, daily live stream during COP28, hosted by the Face of Biodiversity Coalition and the United Religions Initiative. And each day we're discussing the latest developments from Dubai with a particular focus on nature and biodiversity, and also learning about the way faith and spiritual groups all around the world are working to protect and restore the environment. You may know that my name is Gopal Patel. I serve as the co-convener for Faith's Biodiversity Coalition, and I'm joined by my very dear friend, colleague, and co-host, Lauren Van Ham, who's the Climate Action Coordinator at the United Religions Initiative. Lauren, I know it's a Saturday, so thank you for getting up early over there in California. I hope you had a good Friday.
My pleasure. Thanks, Gopal. Great to be with you and with Dan.
Yes, we are joined by Dan Perell, who is live in Dubai. Dan is a representative to the United Nations for the Baha'i international community and the office in New York City. Dan, how many days have you been in Dubai now? Are you settled in?
I'm not even sure what a day is anymore. I think I've been here 2 or 3. It feels like months, and it also feels like just moments at the same time.
Okay, and how are you there for the whole 2 weeks, or what's your plan there?
No, I'm here for the first week through the break day, and then I will be replaced by somebody else for week 2.
Okay, and the Baha'is, you always show up with a really great delegation at every COP. How many delegates do you have there this year?
We have about 7 delegates, maybe 8, from all over the world. And then we also have, of course, many other Baha'is that we are engaged with who are in other capacities trying to contribute from other spaces. So there's about 40 to 50 Baha'is in total that I know of.
Wow. I always joke with you, Dan, that the Baha'is are everywhere. You just don't know them. It's just like, so it's great that you got such a formal delegation, and then let's say a larger informal delegation there. That's really great. And what's your office tracking? What's it prioritizing this year at COP?
Yeah, I mean, there's the standard things that we like to track along the lines of gender equality, the justice theme, so loss and damage and things like that. But really what we're trying to contribute this year is along the lines of values. I think it comes as no surprise to those who are listening. I would imagine that we don't really think that the gap any longer is one of scientific knowledge or understanding. It's really about aligning values with those scientific learnings that we've had over the past decades. And so we're trying to figure out what values drive decision makers, what values drive people who are there. And then the corollary to that this year, sort of the new thing that we're trying to add, is a question about the future that they hope to see. Because we find that when people start thinking about the future, not like the next political cycle, but the actual future, it sort of changes the nature of the conversation to one that is more future-oriented, more detached, and hopefully a little bit more hopeful and aspirational.
Wow. So what does that look like for you guys in terms of this values conversation? How are you kind of entering into those discussions? How are you bringing that to the fore?
Yeah, one of the ways, the very practical way, is through what we call a values roadshow, which is essentially a concept note about how the values of a certain area, whether it be food or energy or finance, how those values find expression in the work that people do. And it's a pretty standard kind of concept note that can actually work across any space, because we think that these values are the underlying assumptions that guide many of the actions we take. So we have this conversation taking place in a number of different pavilions, hosted by others. And then we also have a side event that we're contributing to on food systems. So all of this is really meant to surface this issue of the underlying assumptions that seem to guide our action to a bunch of different spaces. The other thing that we have is an exhibit booth, one of those like 2 meter by 2 meter booths. Yep. Where we are working with Steve Chu and his good Buddhist Suchi friends to ask this question about the future that you envision. And actually, we've called for artistic expressions from children, youth, and older folks as well about the future they wish to see. And he and I were looking at those submissions today, and it's really beautiful when you tap into that side of what it means to be human. you get really lovely responses, and we're hopeful that that different kind of expression is able to change the nature of the conversation, at least with those who we can touch while we're here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have so
Dan,
many questions. Yeah, go on, Lauren, please. Yeah.
So do I. I think this idea of what values drive the decision makers is so, I mean, I wrote it down the second you said it. How, as faith groups, could we influence that conversation? What is our role to play in having these values conversations?
I mean, it's a very different approach, and I don't know yet. We're still learning about it. So whatever I say, please accept as like us experimenting. But we do think that the conversation is often defined by certain assumptions about the way decisions are taken, the way problems are solved. And we as faith organizations often, and I think rightfully, enter that conversation where it is. And so we say, okay, this is the relationship between the global north and the global south, or the rich and the poor. And we have to have a justice conversation in this place and try to, find the mechanisms to align, which I think is great and valuable. The thing we want to add to that, again, it's not a replacement idea. The thing we want to add to that is to actually question the very nature of the systems. Like, can the system allow us to do this? And if it can, then let's have the conversation. But if it can't, then what systems do we need? And I think that second layer of interrogation is something that we as the Baha'i community are trying to learn how to do. And I think all faith-based actors should always be thinking, kind of, what's the difference between me as a faith-based representative and me as an NGO representative? In many ways, we're the same. We are NGO activists, in a sense, trying to advance certain causes. But if someone were to read our perspectives or have a conversation with us, is it distinctive from some of those others? And if not, maybe then it's because we're not drawing on the values side of what it is we have to offer. And if it is, then that's great. And let's learn about that and like play in that area of difference.
Yeah, that really that's pretty stunning. I think it's interesting to see where our beliefs, or sort of what we have been taught, how we have been spiritually formed, translates into action. And then, of course, as you're saying, like noticing where we kind of conveniently sidestep and say, well, except right over here, I'm going to kind of like, and so I think that the Coalition on Biodiversity is, in some ways, there's a lot of integrity in saying, what are the places that we can restore? What are the places that we can genuinely still bring ourselves to? Because we know that this is us, essentially. Nature is us. Can you talk a little bit about Baha'i International and how you've been approaching biodiversity or nature specifically?
Yeah, sure. So the role of the Baha'i International Community's UN office is maybe a little bit removed from many of the direct activities that are taking place. Our role is to contribute to the conversations that happen at the international level, primarily, though not exclusively, at the United Nations. But our contributions are meant to be based on the learning that we see from the grassroots community, Baha'is and their collaborators who are trying to make the changes that they see as necessary in their communities. And in some cases that may find expression through biodiversity projects. In others, it's about gender equality. In others, it's about race. But it's very locally driven in a sense, which is why I actually don't have, at my fingertips, the knowledge of every activity going on around the world. But it's all driven by this quote that says that we need to be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age in which we live. And that idea of being anxiously concerned then allows particularly youth. I mean, we find that youth are really attuned to this reading of their reality to see what is necessary in their community. And one experience that I know of quite well, and we made a short film about it, was in Tanah Vanuatu, where a group of youth saw that the stories of the fish stocks that they heard from the elders did not align with the depletion that they saw in their area. And so they worked actually with their community elders to try and cordon off certain areas and prevent them from being overfished. And this then grew, and neighboring communities wanted to learn from it and understand it. The thing that I find so remarkable about that story is that that very project had been tried by international organizations in that community previously, but it didn't work because it wasn't owned by that local community. It wasn't owned by the youth who convinced the elders, who convinced the parents to say, we need to do this together. And then they did it. And not only did they do it and it worked, it then went to neighboring communities because it was organic to that area. So this notion of being anxiously concerned, of reading your reality and understanding the needs of your community is way, way stronger, we find, and more sustainable, we find, than the idea of an outsider coming in and telling you what's needed and how to achieve it. And as such, we, like people like me, we just try to take what is learned from those experiences and share them in a space like this, for example. And I, do my best in my local community, but it's not as if we are like funding a project or, following it to its conclusion, which has a timeline. It's like these things actually go on for as long as they can. And so this all to say, it's a long prelude to say that there's a lot of things happening, many more that I don't know about than I do know about. But I know that Baha'is are doing their best where they can and when they can, and in the communities where it's appropriate. And that one film is called Tana. It's like 10 minutes, and I enjoyed it. Maybe others will too.
Such a great example, and a really nice example too of the intergenerational solutions that we're seeing, the young people, the elders, the parents. Thank you for that update, that film.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Don't want to keep you too much longer. I know it's late for you, Dan, over there, and I hope you have some nice dinner plans ahead. But I wanted to ask, what you just spoke.
My ramen.
Oh, you got some ramen? Okay.
And that's memorialized forever on the internet now.
There you go. What I want to ask, just building on what your last answer, for me, it really illustrated how faith groups can model good or best practice. And coming back to this COP, we have a faith pavilion. There was a high-level faith leaders meeting a couple of weeks ago in Abu Dhabi, and many of those faith leaders are there over the next 2 weeks. And this is the first time that there's been such a high level of engagement with faith actors at least in a UNFCCC COP. What do you envision? What do you envision happens next? I'm looking like for the next 12 months. So this time next year, we'll be in the middle of a CBD COP, a UNFCCC COP, and a UNCCD COP. So like all the Rio conventions are all having their COPs next year, 1 month apart, starting in October through to December. And I think a lot of us are wondering, how do we bring these conversations together? And that's part of the work of Face for Biodiversity. We talk about biodiversity, but we talk about it intersecting with climate, ecosystem restoration, and other issues such as justice and gender and youth and indigenous peoples. So coming out of this COP, hopefully, whether or not it's a success or not, from a negotiating point of view, I think from a faith perspective, there's going to be a lot of eyes on our collective community and work. What do you see envisioning, or what would you like to see happen coming out of this as we move into the big moments next year?
Yeah, I think that this year we have really reached a new level of collaboration. It's really exciting, and a lot of gratitude to the Muslim Council of Elders for helping this advance. It's really lovely, and I've spent some time at the Faith Pavilion, and they're just people hanging out who are like-minded. They kind of just sit there and listen to the next event, and they don't really know what's on the agenda, but they know that they're interested. Like it's a good space, and there's a lot of positive energy. And I think that's really great. Having a space is sort of the first step to collective action. I mean, that's one of the things that the UN itself should be commended for, is it is a space where all 193 member states can come together. There was nothing like that before, these modern times. So I think that's one success of the space. And then for next steps, my hope is that we can demonstrate what it is to be a learning community through the Faith Pavilion. I think sometimes faith is conceived of as rigid, as old, as outdated, as not in touch with modernity. But if you read the documents that we produce, if you listen to the events there, we are trying our best to do stuff like all others. And in some cases, we're having more sustainable results. As you say, there's a lot of really good practices. But that to say, I don't think that we should be resting on our laurels and say, oh, look at all these wonderful things. Look at this declaration we produced. We can all sign it on the dotted line. Isn't that wonderful? That is wonderful. But that's like the first step of a 12-step program, which is like, hi, I'm the faiths, and I recognize I need to work together. The next steps actually get a little bit harder, because now it's like, okay, I need to come to terms with my own history as a religion, with my own assumptions as an individual, my own conception of right and wrong, because, you know, often religion is tied up with identity, and then, you know, I can't question myself because then it's questioning identity. Like, all of this stuff gets really complex. And so all that to say that my hope from, you know, the interfaith community, I suppose, is that it can learn to work together to develop this sort of learning approach to problem solving, and start to make contributions maybe with the scientific community, with the youth community, with the indigenous community. Wouldn't it be great if like faith and indigenous and youth and women came together for a statement? What a strange group of bedfellows that I think would make people's heads turn, because often the gender space and the faith space have some like tension, as we are aware of. So I think this kind of consolidation of what we've achieved and then outreach to others to see how we can work with them would be a really wonderful next step. And I just hope, fingers crossed, that this Faith Pavilion is not a one-off, but it has actually set a precedent, because I think that, you know, without it as a space, we can then drift off into our own archipelago of action, rather than this sort of unified approach to the degree that we can, of course.
Beautifully said, as always, Dan. But this is why we call you Dan the Man, because you're full of wisdom. We know we can always.
But it isn't only men who have wisdom. I'm Dan.
I know. But
how about Dan the human?
Dan the human. And just echoing Gopal, you lifted up some really good questions for all of us to be thinking about. And thank you so much for sharing what is impressing you about this moment. Because there's certainly reasons to be skeptical and concerned, and you've really given us some great stuff to consider too.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for all the work that you're doing as well for these COP drops. And I hope they don't stop also. I saw that email that says they don't stop even on a Saturday. And I think I'll be with you again next week.
I think so. Yeah, I think towards the end of next week you'll be with us again. So Dan, thanks again for joining us.
I have another goal of not being redundant. That's going to be the hard one.
So much will have happened by then. It'll be fresh news, Dan.
Yes. Great, Dan. Enjoy your ramen. Enjoy the rest of your time there at COP, and we'll check in with you in about a week's time. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
So, Lauren, what do you think of that? A lot of wisdom there for us to digest.
Agreed. Just really such an excellent invitation for ways that we can be kind of holding our faiths accountable, but also interfaith collaboration, curiosity, creativity. I mean, I heard that in what he was saying today. I love this Tana example. It resonates, of course, with cooperation circles across the URI network who are in their own ways finding what is relevant where they are. Really good stuff.
Yeah, I liked his point about, he framed it like a 12-step process, and just first step being like, we're the faiths. And I'd love to like build that concept out a bit more. And I loved his point specifically around, and I think this is something that we can bring and we do, which is self-reflection and recognizing where we have gone wrong as faith communities, you know, where we have maybe not been as strong as we should have been, or maybe not lived up to ideals. And then using that to build strength so that next time round we're better. And I think this moment requires us to be a little bit self-reflective and be like, you know, we're not always the best versions of ourselves as much as we'd like to be. How do we learn from that so we can be better the next time round? And so I love that. I love that something, for me, in many ways, I feel like that's a specific value add that a faith and spiritual lens brings to any kind of social concern. So I really appreciated Dan lifting that up.
Well, and presumably we, as spiritual practitioners, we have some tools for those moments when we need to exercise some humility or look to make some reparations and ask forgiveness. And if we can be modeling that for some of the big decision makers, some of the folks who have really been, carrying some hefty weight and causing harm, it's great if we can start with ourselves and model that for others.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Well, I think we're coming up to time for today. A great conversation with Dan. I love him so much. He's such a wise, insightful person. I'm looking forward to hearing him again next week, but also the rest of our guests that we have over the next coming days. We have Catholic voices, Muslim voices, interfaith voices coming up over the next couple of days to give their insights from the ground there in Dubai. So it's going to be some really great conversations over the next week.
Looking forward to it and looking forward to seeing all of you out there.
Yes, see you all again tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern for the COP drop. Lauren, enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
You as well, Gopal.
Take care. Bye.